Before my wife, 32, and I, 35, got married, when we were in our 20s, she had trouble cutting ties with a long-distance boyfriend she dated for 4 years. She never told me where he lived, but she did tell me he lived 5 hours away. During our dating phase, I told her to choose who she wanted to build a life with. I left her alone for a few days, and she showed up at my house, appearing cleansed and pure of heart. She said goodbye to him, for real, and blocked him on all platforms. She was ready to take this next step into adulthood and responsibility by committing herself to me. I was pleased, but even after she did this, I still waited 2 years before proposing. A little before our wedding, she got kinda antsy, but she disguised it as healthy anticipation. After we were married, she seemed much more at ease, like she finally moved on and was settling into her new life. A whole year after we were married, she started friendships and daily communication with her coworkers. Our marriage was wonderful for years, but I didn't know that for much of the time, she was talking to her ex again. Another thing I should have looked into a little more was how my wife begged me for money. I didn't know it, but she was paying some of AP's bills and buying him things. Our utility bills were barely paid down enough to avoid shutting off. I checked her phone one morning when she forgot it on the way to work. She came back for it, but by then, I saw and copied all I needed to. I scrolled back far enough on their messages to find where she tried to keep it strictly friends. She said she missed him so much and thought about him every day. She couldn't resist a little bit of harmless communication. It started as her just wanting to know what he did each day and then how his dating life was going. They gradually became more and more flirty, and throughout all their messages, she never once mentioned she was married. I wanted to throw up. She was trying to stay strictly friends with an ex-boyfriend, but wouldn't tell him about me, and failed to tell me about her friendship with him. In the most recent texts, she said she needed to see him again, and started talking about having reunion sex. He was thrilled. I worked up the nerve to tell her in her face that we were over, and she needed to get out, but before I could say it, she started telling me a story. It was a giant lie about an upcoming work trip in Altoona. I swallowed all the courage and confrontation. I was prepared to dish out, and pretended to support her. I knew she was going to visit AP, but the time she was gone would be the perfect time to change the locks, get out her stuff, and file for divorce, without her being around to freak out. Little did I know that karma wasn't done with her yet. I kissed her goodbye, and she left for 3 days. On the fourth day, I anticipated the breakup call I was going to make, informing her that I knew everything had proof, filed for divorce, and if she tried to come back on my property, the cops would be called. Before I could dial her number, she called me. She said she was stuck on the side of the highway, 3 hours from our house, and way off course from where she told me she was going for her work trip. This was rich. I pretended to be concerned and confused about her location, and she couldn't make up anything believable. She just said she was misinformed when she told me where the conference was going to be. I played with her nervous emotions a little more before telling her I knew she was a cheating skank, and I had all the proof I needed from her cell phone. She sucked in air so hard, I thought she would pull the phone in. Just like that, her world became big and scary. She was sitting alone on the side of the highway before she could complete her cheating scheme, and now she had to face the reality that she didn't have a home to return to. I told her I only let her go on the trip without telling her I knew the truth, so I got the chance to file for divorce and get a leg up on dumping her. She was terrified and didn't know what to say. I told her if she tried bugging me or starting rumors, I'd share what she'd done with the whole town. So I hung up on her, and she texted me a few times, begging me to let her come back to get her stuff, and maybe let us talk this out. Since I didn't reply, she called AP. He did come to rescue her, but she lied to him too about where she lived. She told him she was living with a roommate right around the area where she broke down on the highway, so he asked why she couldn't get her to help. My wife had a meltdown and told him she was actually married and now about to be divorced because I found out about them. I imagine he was shocked and frustrated, but he allowed her to live with him for 5 months. By that time, he had already cheated on her, and when he realized not even that would make her go, he told her she was a mistake and needed to leave. Of course, even without my help, her family and friends found out we divorced. She was gone for 5 months without saying goodbye to anyone. I think she ended up finding some desperate person looking for a roommate because they couldn't afford the rent on their trailer. She had to pick somewhere close because she never got her car fully repaired after AP's rescue. I don't know where she's going in life, but I've remained hopeful and grateful and found lots of support from people I least expected. Even my ex's parents expressed their apologies and sent me nice things in the mail. Wow, Opie, you remained focused and knew right away you needed to separate from this woman. Letting someone live with you after discovering their infidelity is a huge mistake. It's lucky that your wife made up a lie right when you needed the opportunity to leave her. I think karma was already in effect as a positive result for you and undesirable consequences for her. She proved she wasn't ready to let go of her ex and was too immature for marriage. There are lots of people out there who should not be trying to date anyone because they haven't grown up themselves. Some people have no idea who they even are before they try to start molding to another person. It's impossible to know who you should be with if you don't know what makes you tick. I think if your wife would have taken the time to be independent and decide the course of her life, she wouldn't have been so uncertain. Thank you for sharing your story. You handled this very well. Now, let's get into our second story for today. I always thought it was a good thing that I, 29, let my wife, 25, befriend guys. I trusted her and she always let me check her phone whenever I wanted. Because of that, I didn't check it at all, really. I knew she was friends with a guy we'll call AP. She never told me she was going out with him specifically, she just said friends. A lot of nights, I'd go with her and see her interact with AP, among other friends. It looked natural and guilt-free. Even though the guy was an obnoxious idiot, they didn't look nervous or flirtatious or anything. Now I know that on nights I didn't go with her, she was seeing him alone. I never would have thought my nice, sweet, charismatic wife would be romantically interested in this butthole. Most nights, when we were out with him and other friends, he wouldn't pay for himself. He never offered to treat the group to drinks, even though the rest of us did it every once in a while. I was starting to see him as the least desirable of all my wife's friends. That's why it was so much worse when I arrived home one day to find him walking out of my house with my wife. I blew up on them, asking why he was here. He started stammering and acting like the idiot he always was. My wife figured the best way to handle it was to pretend he was only there to casually hang out and play pool. She didn't expect me to leave them both standing there and go check downstairs for evidence. She followed right behind me through the house, and as I got closer to the basement, she started pulling on my shirt. I found her clothes on the pool table, along with a towel laid down to keep the table clean. I kicked her out. I didn't wait, debate, argue, or think twice about it. The evidence was there. She cried and tried to negotiate an arrangement so that she could keep sleeping in the house each night. I told her no repeatedly until she took some of her stuff and left for stupid AP's house. As I grieved and contacted my mom and family for support, fate wanted to give me one more tragedy to deal with. 1 week later, my mom passed away. It was a really terrible time for me, but even during this time, I didn't consider reaching out to my ex. I only communicated with family and really close friends. They helped me plan her funeral, and when the day came, the last people I would have expected to see there were my wife or her AP. Yet, there they were, walking over to me like they were the greatest thing to ever happen. I couldn't believe my wife's innocent and happy demeanor, like she had no idea her being there would bother me. On the other hand, I could totally understand AP's cocky expression. I was sure the expression on my face told them they weren't welcome, but AP actually had the nerve to mock me at my mother's funeral. He said my mom wasn't the only thing I lost this week. I saw red spreading in from the corners of my vision, and everything got a little blurry. I remember feeling my arm wind up on its own just before the knockout punch. He landed flat on the ground, and everyone gasped. I took the opportunity to announce my wife's affair and the reason for our divorce. Nobody wasted any time in throwing insults at her and demanding that she leave. When she hesitated to leave, people started telling her to shoo and waving their scarves or coats at her like an animal. I walked away and was supported physically and emotionally by friends and family for the rest of the day. She started screaming in frustration for AP to wake up and come with her. He finally did, and they were led away by security. From then on, my wife's social life was over. Everyone she knew thought she was gross and scandalous. Idiotic AP started believing she would cheat on him, so he left her. Maybe he got a little wiser because of all this. After the divorce was final, my ex was admitted to a mental institution to try to get a handle on her extreme depression and remorse. She felt like she didn't know who she was, and she apologized to me at least once a month. It was hard for her to forgive herself, but I just don't understand how she couldn't see it was wrong to begin with. Opie, I am glad you had your family and friends for support over the loss of your mom and then also your wife. It's completely unfair that you had to face the truth of her infidelity at a time when people most rely on their spouses for support. It's surprising to me that she had the nerve or stupidity to show up to the funeral with AP. That's probably the worst thing she could have done, and then AP completely disrespects and insults you. You had every right to react the way you did. Huey overstepped the boundaries of respect and basic human decency. You did the right thing by investigating what she told you and following through with kicking her out. I'm glad her actions provided her with consequences, and even the idiotic AP left her. Hopefully, she gets the opportunity to heal and improve her life, thereby sparing others heartbreak. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Well, here we go again. It seems these girls' nights out activities are more borderline undercover scandals than anything. Unfortunately, in this case, just another cheating spouse. I am 29 and my wife is 28. The first time I met my wife was in a college psychology class. I was sitting in the back, always keen to go and notice. She, on the other hand, sat in the front and even challenged the professor a couple of times. It was her energy that drew me in. She was always the one with plans on a Friday night, while I would have been content sitting at home, watching a game or reading a book. We were opposites in every sense of the word. And yet something clicked after 4 years of dating. We got married and it felt like we were on track to build a great life together. 2 years into our marriage, I started noticing changes. The department store that I ran was an inheritance from my dad. It was an old-fashioned place that sold everything from clothes to kitchen gadgets, but times were changing. Big chains were moving in, and my store was falling behind. The stress was getting to me. Sleepless nights became the norm as I pondered over ledgers, sales numbers, and ways to pull in more customers. My wife knew about the stress I was under, but we were like two ships passing in the night, each stuck in our own struggles. She was a certified nursing assistant at a busy hospital. The shifts were long and the work was taxing. The hospital was always packed, and she had to deal with all sorts of challenges, unpredictable patients, demanding doctors, and an ever-pressing workload. But despite all of that, she seemed to manage her stress well, or at least that's the way it seemed. To let off steam, she began going out more frequently with their friends, girls' nights out, they called it. These outings started off as occasional Friday night plans, but they soon became more regular. It was like a ritual every week. She'd head out to the newest hotspots in Los Angeles, bars, clubs, high-end restaurants, you name it. They'd been there. At first I didn't mind. I thought, hey, we all need our space. She's unwinding, and that's important. Plus, it gave me time to catch up on the work I had been neglecting, but what really started annoying at me was her increased activity on her phone. She was always pretty active on social media, but this was different. She started spending an unusual amount of time on Snapchat and some other new apps I wasn't even aware of. These apps had more secretive messaging options, the kind that left no trace. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, but one night I finally asked why the new apps. Why not just text your friends like you used to? She looked at me, but didn't respond, letting the question hang in the air, making me suspicious from that point on. My gut kept telling me something was off, but I had no concrete evidence. It was just a feeling, a nagging intuition. I couldn't shake. I tried to dismiss it, told myself I was being silly, but deep down, I knew something was wrong, and that feeling, that unsettling emotion, was the only beginning of a long, rocky journey. I had one friend I could confide in, Brian. We have been friends since high school, and our friendship has stayed in place. We were also teammates on the football team. He knows me better than anyone. So when he noticed that I was a bit off, he called me out on it. We met at our usual hangout, a modest sports bar. I told Brian my concerns. He came back with, well, have you considered that maybe she is taking her mind off things? You're not the only one with stress, you know, he suggested. Brian seemed to think she was just unwinding and letting loose, or planning something for me. And yes, our anniversary was right around the corner. The thought made me want to believe that everything was okay, that I was just being paranoid. That glimmer of hope made the next few days a bit more bearable. I even started looking into ways I could surprise her in return. Maybe a weekend trip up the coast, or a romantic dinner at that French restaurant she'd been talking about. But as the days passed, that suspicious feeling I had didn't go away. If anything, it intensified. The department store wasn't getting any better. And to top it off, my wife announced yet another girls' night out this time. However, my curiosity and anxiety had reached a tipping point. So I went to the computer. We shared checked emails and checked her browsing history, and I didn't find anything suspicious. My wife got home about 3:31 in the morning. I went off and demanded what was happening with her. We got into a huge fight, which didn't accomplish anything. The next day I left for work without saying anything to her. She sent me a text apologizing for her behavior and promised to make it up to me. I was still angry and didn't respond to her. Then she followed up with another text asking me to forgive her. I still hesitated in responding to her, but I forgave her. But in the back of my mind, she was not off the hook. When I got home that evening from work, she had dinner ready. I know most of us would be like, okay, she's making this up to me. Nice. But I didn't feel that way. Why? Because every time we have had arguments in the past, she has never done this. Again, it made me suspicious. I went along with it. After dinner, we watched a movie and fooled around later, then went to bed. This behavior of hers went on for another 2 weeks. One night we were home, and we were both standing in the kitchen, and her phone was on the counter. It went off. It was a notification from Snapchat. I reached for it, but my wife grabbed it so fast. It felt like I was just too slow. I looked at her with my eyes widened. She left the house after that, and her actions solidified my suspicions. She was doing something, but I had no proof that she did anything wrong. But that would change. Fast forward a few days. And while I was at work, I was scrolling through TikTok, looking at all the small clips. Suddenly I came across a clip where a woman was kissing a guy. It looked like a bachelorette party. And that's when I saw it, my wife in the background, kissing a guy, his junk swinging everywhere. He looked like he was a stripper while my wife was kissing him. Other women were touching him. I was devastated, but I had to keep my composure. I downloaded the TikTok video onto my phone. After work, I didn't go home and I asked my friend Brian to meet me at our usual hangout spot. When I got to the bar, I showed him the TikTok video and pointed at my wife. He was just as devastated as I was. The first thing he said to me was get rid of her. When I got home after meeting Brian, my wife was already home, still in her scrubs. I didn't say anything to her, didn't even greet her. She noticed that and tried to kiss me. I backed away and told her I was coming down with a cold. That night I slept in the guest bedroom without saying anything to my wife. The next day I paid a visit to a divorce attorney and set everything in motion. After work, my wife wasn't home yet. So I started packing some things little by little, putting them in the trunk of my car so my wife wouldn't see that I was packing. Fast forward a few days, my wife was working a 12-hour shift. On this day, I moved out of the house we were renting. Our lease was up in 2 months and I wouldn't pay any more of her bills. Well, to my surprise, my wife didn't blow up my phone, but I assumed she was home after 8 p.m. Her 12-hour shifts are usually 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., but I found out she had to stay later. When my wife finally got home, she blew up my phone, asking where was all my stuff. Where am I? I never responded to her, but she caught up with me at work, all paranoid and shit. Tried to make a scene in front of the other two employees. I grabbed her by her arm and took her into the break room. I took out my phone and showed her the video before she could open her mouth. I told her I had already filed for divorce. We didn't need to discuss anything else. She started crying, asking for another chance. And I said, no, there is no chance of that happening. About 6 weeks later, we had the divorce hearing and it was pretty cut and dry. We were married for under 3 years. She tried to get alimony, but the longevity of the marriage wasn't there for her to qualify. Even after the divorce, my ex-wife tried to get back with me and she even came to where I worked a few times and brought me lunch. I ate the food, but that was as far as it went. But when she saw that I wasn't budging, she stopped trying. I wanted to expose her, but I didn't, only because she didn't do anything stupid or try to switch the narrative. About 7 months after the divorce, my ex-wife was assaulted. She went on one of these girls' nights and some guy bought her a drink. He must have slipped something in it, like Rohypnol. Luckily for her, she made it out alive. We have chatted a few times and her whole outlook has changed. She doesn't do girls' nights as much anymore, only because of that terrifying incident. I have since started dating sparingly, not rushing into anything. I don't think I will ever get married again after this. I appreciate you, Tony, for allowing me to share my story. Well, in my opinion, this guy's wife using girls' night as a cover for cheating is a calculated betrayal that capitalizes on social norms and the inherent trust in relationships. For many people, a girls' night out is a harmless and much-needed escape from daily life, a chance to catch up with friends and unwind. Because of this generally accepted view, it's a perfect alibi for someone looking to deceive their partner. It's the kind of excuse that on the surface seems both plausible and unobjectionable, making it less likely to raise red flags. In this particular story, the wife not only exploits the socially accepted norm of girls' nights, but also takes advantage of the trust that typically exists between spouses. She's aware that questioning her would make her husband seem controlling or overly suspicious. So she uses this dynamic to her advantage. She makes him second-guess his instincts and effectively turns the emotional tables on him. It's not just a cheating that's damaging here, but also the gaslighting that comes along with it. The manipulation that makes him doubt his own judgment. Adding a layer of complexity is the wife's job as a CNA, a career that's known for its demanding and stressful nature. It could be easy for the husband to justify her frequent outings as a way for her to de-stress and socialize after long shifts. He may even feel guilty for suspecting her, given the hard work she puts into her job, making it all the more devastating when he finds out the truth. In a situation like this, where someone has crafted an elaborate web of deceit, it's more than just a simple affair. It's a systematic erosion of trust and emotional security. Even if this man were to never find out about the cheating, the emotional toll of living with their partner, who is that manipulative, would be considerable. Ultimately, while not every girl's night out is a cover for cheating, this story highlights how such events can be used nefariously. It serves as a cautionary tale that while trust is the foundation of any relationship, blind trust can sometimes be exploited by those with less than honorable intentions. If you enjoy the content, please hit the like button for me and subscribe for more content. The history of what I caught my wife doing is this: my wife and I have been married for 7 years now, been together for 10 years. She works as an assistant manager at a fast food restaurant while I work at a big tech firm. We met through her cousin when they were both in high school together, who introduced us to each other. She was dating another guy at the time, but they broke up shortly after she met me. Being shy back then, it took some time before she began to trust me enough so that we could date each other. We only dated for about 3 months before our relationship progressed into a full relationship. That's until she graduated. She left to go back to school for a course. When she had the time, she would come down to see me during her breaks and holidays. Back then, I lived with my parents until we got married 2 years later. The marriage went well until about 3 years ago, when both of us got caught up at work with long hours. It really took a toll on our relationship, knowing that we hardly had any quality time together like before. Well, as the days go by, we really try to make time for one another, trying to do date nights or whatever, but I started to notice she was a tad bit distant, not as affectionate, and on her phone a lot, so I started to pay more attention to how she was interacting with her phone. I noticed she was texting a lot. I mean, every time we were together, she was sending a text to someone. While we were dating, she really didn't text much now. It seems she is doing it all the time. I caught her last night. She was in the shower, and I caught a glimpse of a text that really caught my attention when she got out of the shower. Well, let's just say I kept asking her questions about what's going on. She broke down and confessed it all to me. She said he was an old friend from high school who recently moved back into town. They have been talking since they were teenagers, but nothing ever happened between them until now. Keep in mind, this is just the first guy she was talking to. Remember, she was talking to 5 guys. He was just the first one I caught her chatting with. So I flat out told her I won't stay married to her if she wants to talk to other men. I told her it's disrespectful and I won't stand for it. Well, she apologized and said she would stop talking to him. I told her, you need to tell him that you're a married woman and she shouldn't be talking to him. Well, another 2 weeks go by, and guess what? I caught her talking to another guy. I couldn't believe it. She told me to my face she wouldn't do it again. And here she is doing it again and talking to another guy. I was livid. I told her if it was me doing that, she probably would have divorced me. She claimed she wouldn't, but would wonder why I was talking to other women. I flat out asked her, where did you meet these men? She hesitated. I told her to answer me. She said Tinder. I said Tinder. Really? After she said that, I walked away from her and went into the living room. She followed me screaming, I am sorry. I am sorry. I told her that we probably need to separate. She started crying. Please don't say that. I told her, you flat out lied to me. I asked you to please stop talking to this guy, and you end up talking to another guy. We go back and forth. At this point, my initial thought process was to contact an attorney to see what my options were. I slept on the couch. She would come in the living room a couple of times to get me to come to bed, but I declined. The next morning, I got up, showered, and went to work. I did not say anything to my wife after work. I went straight to an attorney's office. This is when he told me that the best thing for me to do is give my wife a choice of whether she wants our marriage. The attorney made it very clear beforehand that divorces are never simple, they are messy, and there is no way around getting ugly for both parties involved. When he brought up mediation, though, everything seemed like it would be okay. After that point, he said, mediation seems to work for some divorce cases, not all the time though, and he also said that her talking to other men is usually not strong enough to grant the divorce. You will need to provide proof of an affair. I asked him what about irreconcilable differences. He said when someone files for divorce based on irreconcilable differences, they are filing for a no-fault divorce, meaning neither spouse seeks to prove a wrongdoing that caused the end of the marriage. That's different than your situation. He says if you want to divorce her based on her cheating on you, you will need to get proof, and that will also help your case and also probably stop her from trying to get spousal support from you. I thanked the attorney for his advice and the free consultation he gave after leaving the attorney's office. I head home and noticed that my wife has texted me a few times asking where I am. I sent her a text back letting her know I was on my way home. I had to finish a project at work when I got home. She was all over me. It was surprising to see her act that way. It was fun. But in the back of my mind, I am thinking, what is she up to? After we had some fun, she apologizes for talking to the other guys and she will do everything to regain my trust. She reiterated everything in the back of my mind. I am thinking, how long will this last? So, as the weeks go by, I don't see her on her phone as much, and I thought maybe she was really trying to regain my trust and wanting to work on the marriage until one day I got home earlier than she did. She sent me a text earlier in the day saying she was working late, so being the good husband that I am, I wanted to surprise her and make dinner. I am in the kitchen making her favorite dish when I went to throw a jar in the trash and noticed there was a ripped up phone box from Straight Talk It. Looks like she tried to hide it, or maybe she forgot to, but she didn't do a good job after that. I stopped making dinner and threw everything away. Well, needless to say, I was really upset. This woman doesn't want to be married to me, so I kept my cool and started to think, what do I need to do next? I wasn't going to let her know that I knew she had another phone. At about 11 p.m., my wife came home, and I was on the couch. I had dozed off. I had to play it cool. The next morning after getting to work, I decided to call a couple of private investigators and inquire about their services. At this point, I am trying to find out as much as I can. Remember, she works at a fast food restaurant, and she doesn't make anywhere near the amount of money I make, so I don't want to pay spousal support after work. I had a chance to talk to a private investigator in depth. I told him why I needed his services, and he told me what he could do, so we agreed to meet later in the week. But in the last week or so, my wife has called me a couple of times letting me know she would be working late, which was uncommon, but at this time I didn't care. I had planned to hire the private investigator to see what she was up to. The next day, I meet with the private investigator, gave him a picture of her and what kind of car she drives and where she works. The first day of his surveillance, he catches her kissing a guy at her job. Now this day, she told me she was working late, but she got off work 3 hours early and went to a hotel with this guy. Now mind you, this is guy number one. She came home and tried to be intimate with me. I declined, telling her I didn't feel well, so the next day she told me she was scheduled to work the 3 to 11 shift. That's the information I gave to the private investigator. My private investigator goes to her job and waits for her. That day he sees her pull into the parking lot of her job, but she never got out of her car until a red Mustang pulls up beside her. She gets out and gets in this guy's car. He follows them to a hotel where they stay in there for 3 hours. They leave the hotel and go to a restaurant for about an hour and a half. They leave the restaurant and go back to the hotel until about 10:30 p.m. That's when they leave the hotel again, go back to her job. She gets out of the Mustang, walks over and kisses the driver, gets into her car, changes into her work clothes and drives home. When my wife gets home, I pretend to be asleep. The next day, the private investigator says he will come to my job and give me the footage. I was surprised at that because I didn't ask for the footage yet, but I agreed. We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop. Nearby, when we meet, he shows me everything and even has an SD card for me to give to my attorney. I asked him why he was giving me the footage. He said he doesn't need to continue. He says your wife is cheating. That should be enough to get your divorce. He also showed me footage where she saw three other men, but she just met those men at her job. She kissed two of them. He says his wife of 22 years cheated on him, and he had to do the same thing. She was trying to take him to the cleaners, but he kept his cool, did his research, and didn't have to give her a dime. He advised me to get out of the house without her knowing I left, because once she finds out that you caught her, she might try to have you arrested for something stupid. He advises me to take the footage to my attorney and get this process started, but in the meantime, get out of the house. I didn't care about the house, it wasn't ours anyway, but we had planned on buying a house once the pandemic slowed, so I call a really good friend of mine who I have known since high school. I told him everything that's happened, even hiring the private investigator. He was shocked. I told him the private investigator advised me to get out of the house. He immediately said I can come crash at his place. I told him I need to move out as quickly as possible. He says, I have a truck. He then says I can have you out of your place in a few hours while she is at work over the next few days. I discreetly packed some things without my wife knowing. We fooled around a few times, but she had no idea. I was planning to leave her that night. She sent me a text saying she was working late again. I called my friend and made a plan to move out that night. So after work, I go by my divorce attorney's office, drop off the footage, and told him to go ahead and file the divorce paperwork. So I rush home. My friend shows up about 20 minutes later, and we start packing my things. I only have clothes in my computer, laptop, and a TV that's in the garage. I plan to get a storage unit and store some of the things I am not readily using at the moment. At about 10 p.m. we finish and drive off. When we get up the street, I notice that my wife just made a turn on our street. I thought to myself, perfect timing. 15 minutes later, my phone is ringing off the hook. I sent it to voicemail. She must have called about 20 times inside of 2 minutes. So the next day I wake up and check my phone. She sent 31 text messages and left 5 voicemails. I didn't respond to either one. When I get to work, my boss calls me in his office and asks what is going on because my wife has been calling and calling. I flat out told my boss my wife was cheating on me. I hired a private investigator to get my proof. I moved out of the house without her knowing it, and now I am divorcing her. He raises his eyebrows and says, wow. Okay, then I told my boss. Sorry for all of the phone calls. He says, don't worry about it. Just take care of what you need to. Well, as the day goes on, the phone calls at my job and my phone have become less and less. Then I get a strange phone call from my neighbor complaining that we are making too much noise at night after 10 p.m. I told my neighbor that I haven't been home in 3 days. She says, oh, I didn't know. I told her my wife and I are separated. She said she was sorry to hear that, and she noticed a couple of guys over the last couple of days going to our house after 10 p.m. I apologized to her for that, but there was nothing I could do. I wasn't going to contact my wife because I did not want to. 2 weeks goes by. My divorce attorney calls me and says that my wife has been served with divorce papers. I would imagine my phone would blow up that day, but it didn't. 3 weeks later, my divorce hearing is here. I got to the courthouse early. I drove my friend's truck. I didn't take my car. I wanted to see if she would show up, and yes, she did. She had a briefcase, which I thought was really surprising. Boy, she was in for a surprise. I get out of the truck, walk toward the courthouse, find out what courtroom we were in. Well, I walk into the courtroom. She turns around and glances at me and turns back around. I walk over to my table and my attorney is already there. The judge comes out and asks, are we ready to proceed? To make a long story short, she asked for spousal support and told the judge that I was mentally and physically abusive. But the most amazing part of her story, she couldn't provide proof that I was. Well, my attorney buried her. The judge showed her all the proof of her infidelity. She was shocked. He denied her request for spousal support. She tried to ask for $2,000 per month. The judge granted me the divorce. After that, I never saw her again. About 2 months after the divorce, her cousin, the one who introduced us way back when, said that she was getting evicted and already had her car repossessed. Well, I don't wish bad luck on anyone. But she brought that on herself thanks to everyone who saw through her. When I had to spend money to get confirmation. In the long run, I will save money by not paying spousal support and getting on with my life. Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Today's story is a revenge story about OP taking a stance and getting his life back together after his wife forgot their 10-year anniversary and cheated on him. Now OP is living his best life, and his wife's life is a wreck. Let's get into today's story to find out what happened. I'll call her my wife, just to reflect our status at the time. We had been together for 10 years and were about 15 days from celebrating 2 years of marriage. No kids, the house's lease was in her name, and we were in a totally dead bedroom for 9 months after about 3 months of declining sexual activity. When it happened, it was the stereotypical starfish duty sex. In those 9 months, she also denied me any form of affection, hugs, rubs, touches, kisses. Whatever you could think of, she denied. She claimed it was her way of making me work on writing my PhD thesis. I admit I needed an incentive to write it. I had switched careers after finishing the research part and was no longer motivated to finish it, so I fell for that abuse disguised as a good thing. I tried to push through, and every free moment I got I spent in front of my computer trying to finish the thesis, while she spent her time watching TV, scrolling through social media, or texting and calling her friends. We practically had no time together as a couple anymore. After about 3 months of this, I buckled and couldn't handle the pressure of being stuck in the thesis and the lack of affection and rejection whenever I tried to get a simple hug. I was begging for affection and was always being rejected. That is soul-crushing, and my mind started to wander to suicidal thoughts. Every time I was alone and not working on my day job, I ended up thinking of ways to end my life, evaluating the pros and cons of every way I could think of until eventually I decided on one method. Then I started to think about what messages I would leave behind and to whom. When I decided what message I would leave for my sister, I had a moment of clarity and realized what I was doing and had the strength to stop it by removing what I thought was causing my suffering. I decided not to continue trying to write the thesis, and a few weeks later I stopped begging for affection. It worked. The suicidal thoughts stopped. However, we were now roommates, not husband and wife anymore. She continued to spend her time on the phone texting or calling someone, and even when we were doing something together, which was rare, she would interrupt it to help a coworker with random stuff. Basically, me and our relationship were at the bottom of her priorities. She started to make a habit of answering phone calls and going to the bathroom at a time where in the previous 9 years she would already be asleep. She started to go meet her female friends and coworkers on the weekends to catch up and gossip, which would be boring for me and I wouldn't enjoy it, so she went alone. She arranged dinners followed by extensive talks in the parking lot. That was her reason for arriving in the first hours of the morning. She did this with her coworkers who I didn't know and went without me because I wouldn't fit in or because I was visiting my parents in my hometown. Whenever I complained about those odd behaviors, she always dismissed my concerns and made me think I was crazy. Whenever she needed me, she could be kind, but as soon as she didn't need me anymore, she would go back to mistreating me. The only 2 weeks in those 9 months where she was sweet and fooled me into thinking we were back to normal without sex but with affection was when she asked me to work on a chapter of her PhD thesis. It had to do with programming and she knew nothing about it. As anyone remotely well-balanced can see, I was being used and abused left and right, but I couldn't see it at the time. Even if you pointed out everything wrong about our relationship, I wouldn't recognize it, and if you dared to insinuate she could be cheating on me, I would be really mad at you. I started to open my eyes 1 year ago today. We were on vacation on a beautiful island in the Mediterranean, and I was convinced we were celebrating our 10th anniversary together. Yes, we were in a rough spot. To be fair, our relationship was already dead, but I couldn't see it at the time. But she always made a point to celebrate all the dates, and gift exchange was really important to her. By the way, I'm not that into exchanging gifts and have disappointed her in that department before. For our 10th anniversary, I had bought her something special and never thought she would let it go despite our recent struggles. Well, the day came and I suggested going to dinner at a restaurant instead of eating in our apartment as we had been doing all the previous days. She started berating me, saying it was a dumb thing, and why would we spend money when we could eat perfectly well at our apartment? I told her that that day was a special day, but I didn't tell her it was our 10th anniversary. Apparently, she forgot why that day was special. At the end of the day, I hid her present below her pillow, hoping that when she found it, she would remember what was so special about that day. Well, she found it, but didn't understand why I gave it to her. It was not usual for me to give her gifts out of the blue. Then I realized she had forgotten all about it. It might seem trivial taking into account all the other stuff, but when she forgot about it, I was hurt and broken even more so than I already was until then. But if you asked me at the time, I wouldn't have thought I was broken. We might have had a few little problems, yes, but everyone has them, right? Dumb me talking. On that day, I decided to look for help and I started individual counseling without her knowing to try and solve what I thought was our main problem, our dead bedroom. I was so wrong back then. Looking back, the dead bedroom was the least of our problems, but what's important is that I made that decision and I started individual counseling as soon as we got back from our vacation. In individual counseling, I slowly started to realize all the abusive things I had been put through, but I still wanted to fix things and make us work and go back to being happy like before. The idea of her cheating on me crossed my mind, but I quickly discarded it. There's no way she would do that. We are only in a rough spot. There's a million innocent reasons for her behavior. It took me about 3 months of weekly individual counseling and more episodes of complete disrespect and even boldness, or is it that she got too comfortable to properly hide it? To start to consider cheating as an explanation for her abusive behavior. Do you want some examples? I know you do. She kept her phone to herself, always in her hand or sight with the front facing down, and she took it wherever she went, even in the bathroom. She didn't do any of those things before. Whatever the activity we were doing together, no sexy things, remember, dead bedroom. She would stop to answer her coworker and help him during a more stressful and busy period. Today he needs my help. Tomorrow I might need his help. That was her explanation. On my birthday, we went partying at a club. The good old times where there was no COVID-19 with a few of my old, and they also became her friends. She was constantly texting on her phone and even answered a call at around 3 in the morning claiming it was her female friend fake name, but eventually early in the call I figured out that she had lied and that she was not talking to Emily. Who the hell calls anyone at 3 in the morning, especially a married person? Why would you take that call? Why would you lie about who it was? Why are you talking on the phone for about an hour with this mysterious person at 3 in the morning while we were celebrating my birthday with our friends who we don't get to hang out with much because life happens? I think you all guessed who it was and you are right, but I didn't know at the time and didn't even suspect. I just thought it was one more disrespectful thing. On another occasion, we were talking about going to the cinema that Friday night because it was the last opportunity to watch a movie we wanted to see. On that day, she said she was tired and didn't feel like going out. She wanted to stay home and chill on the sofa. I understood that, and it was okay for me, so I also stayed at home. After dinner, she got a call from her male friend from work, the same from the other calls, and agreed to go out and have coffee and gossip about some impending changes in their departments. Not even an hour had passed since she had said she was too tired to go out. I told her I wouldn't stay home while she went off after trashing our plans, and I would go to the cinema and watch a movie anyway. I bet that's not the reaction you were expecting, but believe me, I could have totally stayed at home and not had any fun. That was how I had some of the fun I had planned to have. Who are you? Me from the past. Of course, she immediately changed clothes and got into a beautiful summer dress. Pretty easy to pull up if you get what I mean, and then she went with him. Yes, he picked her up near our building. No, I didn't get to see him. Yes, I was dumb. I was pissed at the disrespect, but then again, cheating was at the bottom of the list of reasons I could think of. I returned home from the movie and she wasn't there. I called, no answer. I called again, still no answer. I sent her a text. She replied saying this is no time for a girl to be out. I'll be home in half an hour. I decided to wait by the window to try and get a glimpse of the car and guy she returned with. She came back about 2.5 hours later. I did get to see the car and I even heard some things she said to him while outside the car, and what I heard immediately reminded me of the way we would say goodbye to each other when we were starting to date. At that point, cheating started to climb positions on the list of reasons for her behavior, yet it was still far from the top. Yes, I was still dumb and blind. On another occasion, I found her laundry. Yes, I'm not proud, but desperation makes you do things you never thought you would. The panties she wore the day and night she went out for coffee or dinner or company party, I don't recall. It had a lot of what I thought was vaginal fluid, and I mean a lot, which was not normal. No one was having that much fun at work or when hanging out with friends. That's when it became clear she was cheating on me. I felt like my heart was pulled out of my chest. I had found the proverbial gun with the bullets, but still in my mind it wasn't a smoking gun. There was still a 1% chance that it wasn't real. She could have been masturbating, right? No need for a third party to intervene. So I decided to try and peek at her phone. It was really hard because in my mind that was an awful thing. If you reached that point, you were done. There would be no trust. There would be nothing left. I even got the chance, but backed down at the last minute. I had a talk with a friend who told me he too was cheated on. He never mentioned it before, and that the behavior of my wife was similar to his cheating girlfriend. That settled it. I finally got the opportunity to peek at her phone, and there it was in all of its glory. Thousands of texts exchanged between her and this coworker who was having a difficult time because his mother had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Another low blow. My grandmother suffered from deep Alzheimer's disease for about 10 years until she passed away, so she knew that was a soft spot for me. It was also full of sexual talk. Pictures in underwear from them both. Everything. They had been at it for at least a year until I found out. 1 damn year. The same time as our dead bedroom and the same duration of her torturing me by denying affection. She not only chose to cheat on me, but also to be loyal and faithful to him, as if being with her husband was wrong and a betrayal of the other guy. Well, I was glad she did it. At least I didn't have to battle with the thoughts of having had sex or even touching her before or after he had sex with her. As soon as I found this undeniable evidence, I was crushed, but at that point I was already expecting it and didn't crumble immediately. I decided I would leave her as soon as possible. My situation was the best one could be in when in that situation. No kids, no house owned, and no lease in my name. I could just pack my things and leave as soon as I found a place for myself. I also decided I would not let her know what I had found out and, more importantly, how I found out. So I kept my composure and pretended like nothing happened. I even helped her with her dress, as she was preparing to go to a big party event at her company, and I already knew that was not the main event for that night. He would be there as well, so naturally they would do what adults do. About an hour later she left, and I finally could grieve, cry, yell, get mad, and let all my emotions out. I called my friend, read more of their texts, created this Reddit account, and spent about 4 hours writing my story and posted it on Dead Bedrooms, which I had been following for the previous 6 months, when I thought our problem was just a dead bedroom. I want to thank all the people that supported me at that time and reached out with advice and, more importantly, pointed me to useful resources, such as this community, which I have been following since. Of course, I couldn't sleep, and I stayed up until she arrived home at around 7 in the morning. Of course, she told me her group of friends was the last to leave the party and that it was great. And I know it was really great. In one of her texts to him later that day, she said to him, "The after party left my thigh bruised because of the handbrake." Almost all cars in my country have handbrakes between the driver's and passenger seat, so it's clear what kind of an after party it was. That happened on the weekend. During the week, I kept playing dumb while I was meeting with lawyers, found a place to live, and arranged for my mail to be forwarded to a new address. All the while, she stayed at work late. Another peek of her messages showed that she wasn't working but instead waiting on the other guy for another round of sex. In the previous 2 weeks, they had had sex more times than we had in the previous 18 months of our marriage. Way to go, wife. By Friday, I had everything ready to move. As soon as she went to her job, my family came by and helped pack all of my things and transport it to my new place. At the end of the day, I sent her a message saying, "You know what you have been doing." I left the house and I'm filing for divorce and immediately blocked her and called her mother to tell her about the divorce. I didn't explain why. I just said her daughter knew what she had been doing and should explain. My wife kept trying to call me without success. She called my mother, but she never answered. In the previous 10 years, she had never called my mother. She even called my friends, but they were already in the loop and never answered her either. She then proceeded to text me via the same app she was using with her affair partner and even accused me of being brainwashed by a former coworker of mine and leaving to go living with her. Ridiculous accusation and a classic example of projection. I blocked her. I only got to talk with her 2 more times. The next Wednesday, I called her to tell her the lawyer had sent a letter with all the information pertaining to the divorce. She tried to play the lost wife card who didn't understand what was happening and why I was doing this. She kept crying, saying she had always fought for us and that I never had, and that she had been thinking that we should go to marriage counseling for some time. I think most of us are familiar with all of this. The thing is, I almost fell for it. After that call, I started to doubt what I knew was undeniably true. Yet my broken and beaten heart started to doubt and wanted to believe in all her crap. Luckily, I had copies of their messages and read some of them to get real. Yes, it was pain shopping, but I needed that to keep myself focused and to not back down. They basically got to know every parking lot suitable for car sex around our house, his house, and their work. They most likely did it in their work office buildings, and the most hurtful revelation was that they regularly did it in our house, in our bed, living room, kitchen, everywhere. The last time I spoke with her was about a month later when we signed the divorce. At that time, she tried to project this cold, distant, and superior persona. At the end, I told her that I knew everything she had done with the affair partner. Her response was something like this: "What I did was only to get a reaction from you." I think she didn't fully understand what I knew. Perhaps she even thought I was just pissed at all the attention, non-sexual, she gave to the other guy. The next weekend, I met with her parents and told them most of what she had put me through and about the affair, although without revealing the messages. Of course, they had a hard time believing their daughter could do such horrible things. Doing so is telling her, "This is how I got you. Next time, be more careful and hide your secret life better." But I didn't show them the evidence. That was the last time I had contact with anyone in her family. How did I deal with all the trauma? I kept going to individual counseling. I still am today. I relied on my friends and family. I never hid her cheating. Doing so would be collaborating. I let my emotions out. Every time I felt like crying, I cried. It came in waves. One moment I was fine, the other I felt the brutal shock of everything once again. Just let it all out. It'll pass and get better. I haven't had one such episode for months, but I know I might have one anytime, and it's okay. I started doing things I felt like doing. Mostly going to concerts and watching plays at theaters. Damn COVID-19. Going by myself, without other people. It felt great not to miss out on something you think you might like just because you don't want to go alone and your friends don't feel like going. Go to events even if you don't feel like going. It's an opportunity to meet new people and get yourself out of your bubble. Yes, it won't cure you, but the boost you get from just talking to new people, even if just for a few minutes, is wonderful. Make an effort to interact more with other people. I'm an introvert, so this is a hard and important thing for me to do. The only way to get better at talking and being with and around other people is, well, by doing it. Has it been easy? Hell no. It's a struggle, but with time it gets better. I confess I was doing much better before COVID-19 hit my country and shut everything down. In the past 3 months, I felt like going backwards in my recovery because all things I did to cope with the situation were not available. Concerts and plays were canceled. Parties and events were canceled. Friends and gatherings were forbidden. I moved to my parents' house to be with them when we were ordered to stay at home. Despite being in a really privileged position, sometimes I felt trapped and suffocated without being able to take a walk in a beautiful garden and take a break from the people in my house. We love each other, but we all need our own space. As a consequence, I found myself going back to all the things she did more often, and it has been hard. Thank you all for reading this far. You deserve a medal. I also want to thank everyone who reached out to me in my previous posts and comments. Knowing an internet stranger cares might seem unimportant, but it really can be the difference between being stuck in a miserable mindset and turning yourself around and coming back with renewed strength. I hope my story can help someone. I know it's hard, but it's possible to break all the emotional abuse. You are worth it on your own. You don't need anyone else to tell you that you're worth it. Take back your power and live for yourself. You can do it. Wow, Opie, what a touching story. I'm so glad to hear that you left her and are doing better than you've ever been before. If I were you, I would also tell your in-laws your side of the story, in case your wife tries to hide what actually happened. I'm positive that she would never tell them about how she treated you. It seems the only consequence that your ex had to face was the absence of you in her life. That in itself is a big consequence, but she never felt the shame of having her family know that she destroyed her marriage with an affair. Telling her family will allow that to happen. Best of luck to you, Opie. Keep striving. Thanks for taking the time to listen to today's story. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so, and comment below on what your thoughts are on today's story. If there's a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me.